Hello, it's Dan, the real estate guy, coming to you from the home office once again, and today's topic is just simply the foreclosure timeline. You know, you'll be surprised how many people in foreclosure don't really even understand the timeline. You know, they've got their head buried in the sand, they don't really want to deal with it, and more importantly, the banks don't always run by the timeline, all right? They take longer to do things. They're not allowed to take shorter time to do things. They have to follow this timeline that we're going to go through. What I found interesting about the timeline is that when I took the time to explain this to someone in foreclosure, when I worked a lot of pre-foreclosures where they have equity and you're trying to see if there's a way you can purchase that equity. That's what you're after right there, okay? You offer solutions for them. You'll see that in that pre-foreclosure video. You offer ways for them to solve their problem so they don't need to sell to you. By doing that, you gain some rapport and some respect from this person because you're there to help. You let them know, you don't have to sell it to me. There's other things you can do. Here they are. I just want to make sure you don't let it go to the bank. All right, so that's one situation where explaining the timeline can gain you some trust with this person. I used to ask them, do you understand the timeline, because I can take a few minutes and go over it with you, and they might set them back a little bit. Well, okay, this guy is willing to help me a little bit, even though I just told him I wasn't going to sell to him or something like that. All right? Because remember, they might be looking at you as a vulture when you first show up, because too many people have that attitude. My attitude, as you remember from some of the other videos, is I have a service. Not everybody has the cash or the means to the cash. They can. We know that they can. Watch that video on raising money. But most people don't realize that. But most people aren't coming to the door and saying, I can just pay cash for this property and get you out of here, get you enough money to restart somewhere else. You know, not everybody's offering it that way, you know. Some people are coming at them like, you're in trouble. You need to sell to me. Well, it doesn't work. You know, it might work once in a while, but it's not really the way to go. So when I approach them, I just let them know I had a cash buying service, and then we'd get to talk, and I would just ask them, do you understand the timeline here? You know, often they say, you know, I think so, but I'm not real quite certain of that. I say, okay, let me just take a couple minutes, and here's the timeline. Do you have a notice of default? They'd say, I think I have that. I said, do you know your date? It's important to know the date of your notice of default. Because you have 90 days from the notice of default to make up your back payments and stop your foreclosure. That's your right as the homeowner. The bank doesn't really want the property. They just don't. All right? And I can show you that because they don't even go by the timeline sometimes. You know that they may wait over a year after you've missed your payments before they even file the notice of default. In other times, when we don't have so many, they might file that after you miss 1 or 2 payments. 3 at the most, right? But we have people now living in the Sacramento area that haven't made a payment in 26 months, and they might not have a notice of default. Silly, isn't it? So what I'm saying about the timeline, and I've explained to people, is that the bank's giving you 90 days from the date of your notice of default. That's why you want to know that date. And they should have that date because it would have been a notice put on their door and sent to them normally through the mail, maybe even a certified copy in most cases. So they've got both. All right? So they can look at that and they can see their notice of default. They don't always know what that means, even though it may explain it on a notice. I had one, I think I threw it away the other day. I took off the door of the last place I bought. So they're very careful about posting these notices now. They even post them in other languages. Then they step back and they take a picture of it. They don't want people to say they weren't notified. All right? So the person's notified. They have their notice of default. I'm letting them know they have 90 days to bring that current if that's something they wanted to do. On the 91st day, that's the earliest day, that the bank can then file a notice of sale. We call the notice of default an NOD. We call the notice of sale an NTS. All right, it's notice of the sale. All right. And the sale cannot be any less than 21 days from that day. You can't go 90 days, file a notice, and sell it the next day. It doesn't work that way. You got to have 21 days notice for that. The important thing to understand here is the bank rarely files the notice of sale on the first day that they can file it. They just don't. In some cases, they file all these NODs, notice of default, and then no one cures. In a market like we have today, they probably have an estimate of how many people will bring their loans current in that 90 days. That estimate in today's market is probably near 0. because too many people are upside down, meaning they have no equity, and in most cases they might be $200,000 upside down, meaning they might owe $400,000 on a house that's worth $200,000. If they're $10,000 or $15,000 behind in their payments, they're not excited about bringing those payments current and then continuing to make payments on a $400,000 loan when the house is worth $200,000. It doesn't usually work for them. So the bank has to file these notices of default. Then they have to decide, when are we going to file the notice of sale? After all, very few, if any, are going to bring their loan current. So I would look at the person when I'm working with them and they would think 90 days, that's pretty good. You know, and I was talking to people that had equity. They might be $6,000 or $7,000 behind. There's solutions there. They can come up with money and save their equity. But a lot of them didn't. All right? Some of them didn't even want to. You see, in those days when they had a lot of equity, and it'll be back sometime, but there was usually one of the 3 Ds involved. There was usually death, drugs, or divorce. I did one transaction that had all 3. I should do a video on that if I haven't already done one. But there was a death and a couple inherited a house. It was free and clear, and one of them put a loan on it, then they went on drugs. Then they got mad at each other and got divorced. So they had all 3, the death, the drugs, and the divorce. And then I came along and purchased their equity. I purchased the property from those folks. Gave them enough money so they can get started over somewhere else, both of them, and that I could clean the property up, put it on the retail market, and make a fair profit. It's a service. I'm offering a service. They didn't have somebody else offering that to them at the time. They probably had several different mailers. I was one of them. I mailed a postcard. But I was the one that got the interview. They may have interviewed other people. The other people might have, come at them as if they're taking advantage. I came at them as if I can help, and it didn't matter to me if they said yes or no. Right? I wasn't desperate for the deal. This is what I offer. If you'd like to take it, you can. But I remember explaining the foreclosure timeline to him. All right, he was still in the house. She was gone. And he appreciated that. He didn't understand it. He didn't understand a lot of things. That's why he got the house free and clear, then encumbered it, and he was on drugs. Or at some point he was on drugs. Not when I was talking to him. Okay? So anyways, you're going to explain that timeline to him, and then explain some strategies that they might be able to employ in that timeline. And for you, as you explain the timeline, or how this timeline can pertain to your business, now that you understand it, you've got the 90 days, and then sometime the bank's going to file the notice of sale and sell it 21 days later. So what does that mean for you and the various strategies you might be working when you're working foreclosures? You might do a couple of mailers during the 90 days. They think 90 days is longer than it really is. All right? So if you put a mailer out early, like I used to do, they often got my postcard before they really even knew what was going on. So their notice of default was just filed. It maybe wasn't even posted yet, but it was filed, and then boom, there was my mailer. Sometimes it was there the same day, or they didn't know what was going on. They would call me, and I'd say, well, obviously you have a notice of default. Are you behind in your payment? So you're using that in your strategy. You understand the timeline. You might also understand the timeline that most people think 90 days is a very long time. They might throw your first mailer away. So maybe you need to send another one 30 days later. After all, 30 days has slipped by. If they've made no progress on bringing their loan current, they're still facing foreclosure. You might even do another one 60 days in, knowing they have 30 days to go. You might then wait until the 90 days is up, knowing they're going to get a notice of sale. Right? They may not get it right away in today's market, but that's the next step. So you might have a mailer that explains that to them. Your 90 days is up. At some point soon, the bank is going to file a notice of sale and hold a foreclosure sale 21 days later. So you can use the timeline to gain rapport with the folks you work with in pre-foreclosure. You can use the timeline to figure out how you're going to employ your different techniques, because motivation is different at the beginning of that 90 days than it is after it's up. So you can use it that way as well. As we mentioned, some lenders are not sticking to any kind of timeline. They should put that notice of sale and sell the property at the courthouse steps. Either put a bid on it, what we call a full debt bid, and it just goes back to the bank, or put a low bid, which they only do on 2 out of 100 properties in my area. put a low enough bid on it so one of us can buy it and they get cash that way. It only happens 2 out of 100. It's a very tedious process. It's tough. I've already mentioned beginners probably should stay away from that technique. It's also very risky. Very, very risky. But anyways, you want to understand this timeline for those 2 reasons. One, to work with folks that may be in foreclosure, and also for you, so you can figure out, how does this help or hurt my strategies? How should I adjust my mailers or my contact or going to the door? When should I do that? You've got the timeline to use. All right? Some people will just wait till they get a notice of sale before they even bother contacting them, realizing that they're much more motivated now. They've got 21 days. Remember, the lender then can postpone that sale, postpone that sale, and postpone that sale, sometimes for no apparent reason. All right? It happens a lot. I just got a call from an owner yesterday that didn't ask for a postponement, didn't ask for anything, and they canceled their sale. That's rare. Usually a sale is canceled when it's brought current. This person hasn't made a payment in 26 months. They have no plans to make a payment. They are trying to work a short sale, but they're nowhere near getting approved. And they were shocked and surprised when they checked on their sale, which was supposed to be in a couple of days, it was canceled. Now, there could be some reason. They could feel like the notification process wasn't correct, or there was a flaw in it, and they need to start over. They'll do that sometimes. It's kind of rare, but they'll do that. But what I'm saying is they don't stick to any timeline. They have to stick to the minimum timeline. They have to give the 90 days and the 21 days, but it's completely up to them when they file that notice of sale. You know, I like it when I watch one that's had a notice of default, the 90 days is up, now it has a notice of sale, it's got a sale date, it postpones 3, 4, 5 times. I've seen them get postponed 10 times, 12 times. You know, it's amazing. But when they're coming up on the 1-year anniversary since the notice of default, I kind of expect something to happen. I expect it to go back to the bank and become a bank-owned property, or get a low enough bid for me to buy it. Something should happen because the year is coming up. If they let the year go by from the NOD, they need to file another one. That old NOD is no good anymore. They're not working off that one anymore. They'll file a new notice of default, which means there's a fee for that, right? Now, maybe under the bailout situation, they don't care about the money. They seem to be wasting it everywhere. Maybe that's a waste of money and they don't mind. I don't know. You know, we'll learn those things over time, and we'll report them to you if we ever figure them out. I've often said we're not trying to figure out what the banks are thinking, because it looks like they're not thinking, all right? So we're not going to worry about that. We're going to react to what they do. Sometimes there's no rhyme, reason, or patterns, and sometimes there are. And I'm watching for those all the time. It seems to help my business if I understand those patterns and other common things that will help me get the transactions that I'm getting. All right? So that's the foreclosure timeline. When you tell someone in foreclosure, explain it to them, take the time with them, even though you may not get to buy their property, it will help you. All right? You'll also use it in your strategies for your timing of mailers or contacts. And that's the timeline. It's fairly straightforward, fairly simple. Check out in your area what's going on, but that's basically how it's working here. All right? I'll see you on the next video.